this computer. Okay. Does it tell you that it's recording?
Yes. Oh, actually, it says recording and it's red. Is that
right? That's perfect. Okay, great. Okay, good. We are ready to go. Okay, so we're going to be doing the second part of the Shiur on honoring Kohanim, and what we're going to do is we're going to work off the same. And I apologize, by the way, if there's any lag, and I'm working off a hotspot, and I'm outside, so if anything is different than usual, so I apologize. But we're going to be working off the svara from last week, which was that the idea behind the mitzvah, the nature of the mitzvah of honoring Kohanim, is that we honor Kohanim. We have a chiyuv to reflect the uniqueness of a Cohen, and the way we reflect that uniqueness is by honoring the Cohen and by putting him first. Okay, so and I think we accomplished a lot in the first year, and this year is not dependent on that year, other than that one line, that one svara, because we're going to be using that as an assumption as to what the mitzvah is all about. In this second part of the Shiur, what we're going to be looking at is the two halachos. Now, the reason why we're going to be looking at these halachos, we generally don't delve deep into it. In other words, every mitzvah is essentially, every one of the 613 mitzvahs is essentially a super category. And in that super category, there are multiple details. There are Torah laws, what we call deoraisa. There are rabbinic laws, which are deoraisa. And those could be they could be set up and there could be millions. I doubt millions, but at least tens, if not hundreds of thousands of little details, customs that all fit into just one mitzvah. And if we would try to examine every single thing, so then you would never leave one mitzvah your whole life. You would just be explaining, but if your svara is correct in what you've come up with in terms of the larger nature of the mitzvah, so then what you would have is for each of the detailed halachos that you find, your svara should fit into it, right? You shouldn't need to have one svara for the nature of the mitzvah, and then one svara, a different svara each time to explain other parts of the mitzvah, right? Because then that wouldn't be consistent. As your one svara should basically explain every single thing within the details. But there are some details that are so telling that they're worth examining on their own. In other words, what I mean by telling is, for myself, where it seems like these halachos go against everything that we've learned about in the nature of the mitzvah, and therefore understanding how they fit into the svara tells you a lot about the svara itself. So it's worth its own investigation. It's worth its own flushing out. So I found two of those halachos in this sugya that I think are worth spending time on. So the first one, if you remember, the Mishna we had seen in Gittin talked about that the Cohen gets the first aliyah for Darkei Shalom, right? So out of peace, so there aren't fights. Okay, so this is strange because it would seem to be the Cohen should have that anyway, right? The mitzvah should dictate that he gets the first aliyah. So why do you need a rabbinic enactment to make sure he gets the first aliyah if that's right? So that's the first strange thing. Okay, the second halacha that we have is the idea that there's a contradiction inherently in this mitzvah, because we have a mitzvah, and we actually learned this mitzvah together, but we have a mitzvah of honoring a scholar, a Torah scholar, Talmid Chacham. So that's a Torah law. So it would seem to be, if a Cohen and a Talmid Chacham were in the room together, so you have this inherent contradiction where the Talmid Chacham also has to honor the Cohen, and the Cohen also has to honor the Talmid Chacham. So who do we honor? Who do we put first, right? That's and there's a lot written about this in the Rishonim, along with something that looks like a contradiction in the Rambam, and so I want to look at those two things. Okay, that's the idea here. Okay, so let's look at this is the Gemara here in Gittin. This is a continuation of the Gemaras that we saw last week. The Gemara says like this. Gemara, we'll do it outside because we already did on the introductory shiur. But the Gemara says, why do you need this Darkei Shalom thing, right? Why do you need this whole enactment from the rabbis? It's deoraisa, it's a Torah law, right? So not only that, but the whole Torah is for Shalom, right? So what do we need? What do you need more for that than that for, right? So so the Gemara says that like if the Cohen wanted to give to somebody greater than him, he usually can, but here we're trying not to. Okay, so the question is like this that I have on these Gemaras, that if it's clear that Darchei Shalom isn't deoraisa, right? So that's what this Gemara is saying, right? That Darchei, because it says we don't need Darchei Shalom because we have this halacha deoraisa. So if Darchei Shalom is deoraisa, so then, right, if it was from the Torah, so then the Gemara would never ask this question. So if it's not deoraisa, what is Darchei Shalom, right? What is this? What's this idea of Darchei Shalom, that we do things in order to keep the peace, right? What's the nature of that, of this, I don't know what to call it, but this thing, Darchei Shalom, that the Mishnah lists. Okay. Abaya, in this Gemara, seems to like negate the entire halacha, right? He says the whole thing is for Shalom, right? Like, the whole Torah is for Shalom. So he's in essence saying that that there's no mitzvah really, that this halacha isn't unique, right? You can give honor to anyone you want, right? Abaya, as one of the rules of learning, Abaya is an Amora, so he can't come and argue on a Mishnah, right? If he was a Tana, so then he could say, okay, here's a different opinion within the Mishnah. But Amoraim, who came after Tanaim were the ones in the Mishnah, and Amoraim that came after, can't argue on the Mishnah. The Mishnah clearly says that this is a halacha. So how is Abaya? What's Abaya doing when he comes in and says that you don't have to follow this? And then how does Abaya understand? Keep in mind, what we're learning is the mitzvah of וקדושתו, of making a Cohen sacred, right? By putting him first, right? Recognizing that uniqueness. So how does he understand that mitzvah? The Gemara calls him Mar, but it's really Rabba. Rabba disagrees with Abaya, right? When it comes to a shul, right? So in a shul, Rabba holds Cohen can't give the aliyah to anybody he wants to, because that's how you have fights. The shul's this public place. Then your house, like no one's there, it's not going to be a fight. But you can't do this, Okay, and then what's Rabba's position on this actual halacha? How does Rabba understand it? Okay, the Yerushalmi.
Just one question.
Yeah.
Quick question. All that we're talking about now in terms of kibbud of Kohanim, from the 4 psukim that we originally talked about, that makes it a deoraisa, giving kavod.
Yeah.
Okay, and kavod to a Talmud Chacham is deoraisa, coming from what? How do we know it's a deoraisa?
From a Talmud, how do we know that kavod for a Talmud Chacham is deoraisa?
Yeah.
Well, we learned that we'll see. Well, actually, I think I'm going to bring it down here in the Makoros, but like there's a pasuk.
Okay.
Deoraisa. The Rambam holds the mitzvah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the Yerushalmi here, the Yerushalmi in source number 2 here has a straight out like machlokes. The Yerushalmi brings it down that there's a machlokes between Rishon ben Yochai and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi about whether or not the kiddushto, giving a Cohen first, is actually a deoraisa or not, right? So they have this Darchei Shalom. They have a machlokes. One of them holds, Rishon ben Yochai holds deoraisa, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi holds derabanan. So there you go, right? Here's our machlokes. This helps us out greatly, right? So there's an actual machlokes about this, and that's our. So we have to explain that machlokes, right? Deoraisa derabanan machlokes are always fascinating, right? Because it's like on a conceptual level, it's very hard to understand what they're arguing about, right? Two people come along and they like, okay, we agree that this is halacha. We know that Darchei Shalom is halacha, but the question is whether it's deoraisa or derabanan. So how do you ever, right? This took me a long time to figure out how to analyze debate about whether something's deoraisa or derabanan. What's the argument? Whether God said it or not? Like what exactly is on a conceptual level? How do you analyze that type of a machlokes? So you're gonna have to get into that, right? That's right. Yeah, you understand like the difference. Like in others, if I'm arguing about whether something is halacha or something's not halacha, okay, fine. So that's one argument. If the difference is within the halacha of when the halacha applies and when it doesn't apply, fine. So that I can understand. But like whether or not it's deoraisa or not, that should be something that's like pretty explanatory, pretty just self-explanatory. It should be straight out. So it shouldn't be something that's really open to debate. So it's a fascinating thing whenever we do see it, that it is open for debate. Okay. Okay. Tosfos pulls a neat trick, right? So Tosfos here in number 3 pulls the asmachta trick. The asmachta trick is always a great Rishonim trick. Asmachta says that yes, there's a pasuk 100%, but the pasuk doesn't tell us it's deoraisa. What the pasuk is doing is the rabbis came along and said this is halacha. The overall concept of this halacha you can see is hinted to in this pasuk. The pasuk doesn't tell us that you have to do this, but it's hinted to. So then we came along and we said that this is a halacha that you have to do. The rabbis came along and said this is a halacha you have to do, but the halacha is rabbinic. It's not from the Torah. The pasuk that they bring just shows you that there is such a concept. The rabbis jumped on that concept and said, okay, here you see the concept. So therefore, we're going to hold that it's deoraisa, right? So that's a Tosfos. It's like a nice middle ground. Obviously, Tosfos is not trying to find a middle ground. That's what Tosfos holds. This is what he maintains is what happened, right? But it's just it's a fascinating thing that we have to also look at. The idea of a smachta. Okay.
Smachta is deoraisa drabanan.
Asmachta is generally considered derabanan. That's the whole point. It's not a deoraisa is that you have a straight out pasuk that tells you have to do this, right? Or the rabbis have a tradition that the pasuk we don't read the pasuk this way, but the rabbis do, and they know that this is the limud. This tells us is the Torah law. Asmachta means there is a pasuk straight out. There's a pasuk, but the pasuk isn't commanding you to do this. That's not what the pasuk is telling you to do. But there is an asmachta that you can rely on. Right, you can rely on this pasuk because it tells you, right? The pasuk says וקדושתו, right? So Tosfos says here in source number 3, it says the whole davar sheb'kedusha, toach rishon levarach rishon, right? So the pasuk does say וקדושתו. It does say you should sanctify him, right? So right, Gemara had said, all right, what does וקדושתו mean? It means that you should give him first, right? And let him do everything first. But now the Gemara comes along and says. Tosfos understands that Gemara is saying it's not saying that that's a deoraisa that you have to do this, but rather there's an idea of giving first, right? That's the idea, and therefore the rabbis came along and said, look, there's this idea of וקדושתו, that's what you should do. Okay. Okay. So then the Gemara here says, and this is where we get into our next great thing. The Gemara says in the Darim, right? The Gemara says, "Shari le'letzurva mirabanan." Lamemar tzurbanan ana sharle tigur bereisha. Chsiv v'nei David k'hanim hayu hayakoi notel barosh aftam chacham notel barosh. Right. So the Gemara right says that Dרכי Shalom comes to prevent the Cohen from honoring another Talmid Chacham. Right, because that's what the Cohen's going to do. He's going to look around the shul and say, I shouldn't go first. That Talmid Chacham should go first. Right. But the whole Dרכי Shalom thing is that no matter who the Cohen is, he goes first. Right. So that seems, and Abba, here's what you were asking before, where it says in number 5, Kol Tam Chacham mitzvah lahadro. Right. So you have a mitzvah deoraisa to, as it says, mipnei seva takum v'adarta pnei zakein. Right. So we have a mitzvah to give Talmid Chacham first, just like a Cohen. That's what this Gemara is saying. Right. And that's what right. So how did the Gemara come to the conclusion that no, we give to the Cohen first and then the Talmid Chacham? How did that happen? Right? What's the process there that we do that? Okay, and then we get even more confused here because the Gemara Megillah seems to say that the only time that the Cohen says a bracha before the Talmid Chacham is if they're equal, right? And the Ritva, right? We went over this in the introductory shiur. The Ritva says that it's that by the Chacham, right? So there's when people walk by, so somebody just recognized me. I apologize. So I'm like on an exercise path here. So okay. So anyway, so when you have the Gemara says that if you have a Talmid Chacham, it's only when the Chacham and the Cohen are equal, right? Otherwise, the Talmid Chacham gets first, and the Ritva says it's zilzul Talmid Chacham, right? It's zilzul kavod Torah. Right. In other words, if the Cohen Amaretz, this guy's is an ignoramus. His father happened to be a Cohen. He's a nobody. And then all of a sudden, so now this guy goes first. So you're being mizazel. You're like you're lowering the kavod of the Torah. So you can't do that. So that's the Ritva's whole argument. This starts off a whole thing here, right? That we have a big problem here. Okay. So
doesn't that make it, practically speaking, easier to deal with? Any Kohen, no matter what his status is, as long as he's a kosher Kohen, he gets the aliyah. If you're going to start talking about maybe the Talmid Chacham should get the aliyah, well, he's not such a Talmid Chacham. He is a Talmid Chacham.
Right. Well, that's the whole point. That's the whole. It seems to
So
be
instead of
kind of
trying
Dr.
to start researching the background of the Talmid Chacham, we have a solution. The Cohen gets the first aliyah, no matter who he is.
Right. So on a superficial level, that's what it seems to be, right? That's what it seems to be is the whole idea behind the Mishnah's idea of Darkei Shalom, right? That's what it seems to be, and then that would be great, right? That would be very good, but that's not what's happening here, right? That I mean, life isn't so simple, right? So okay, and then right. So now Tosfos comes about and asks about what about וקדושתו, right? So. Right, that seems to be a pasuk that says the Cohen should make the bracha first, right? So Tosfos says that as long as the Cohen's a chacham, he doesn't have to be equal to the Talmid Chacham. As long as he's a Talmid Chacham, he should make the bracha first, right? And that's still a fulfillment of וקדושתו, right? So, but now the question is, let's say it's an ignorant Cohen. Why doesn't וקדושתו apply to an ignorant Cohen? Where did Tosfos get this? That if as long as the Cohen's a Talmid Chacham, so then וקדושתו applies, right? How is Zilzul b'chalot Torah pushing off וקדושתו, right? How does that work? That it pushes off וקדושתו, okay? And right, and what's the svara? This is the important question for us. What's the svara of those that give kavod to the Cohen above the Talmid Chacham? How does that work? How do they do that? Okay, the Gemara in Harios, as this is like a well-known Mishnah. The Gemara in Harios is Mishnah about they have a Cohen Amaretz, and the Cohen Gadol is an Amaretz. He's an ignoramus, right? We had that for 40 years. The Cohen Gadol was the position was purchased from the Romans for 40 years, right? So these guys were complete ignoramuses. And then you have a mamzer who usually is on the lowest of the pecking orders of honor in the community, and he's a Talmid Chacham. So, right, so you have the triage case, right, or an aliyah case, it would seem to be, right? Yeah, where they both get wheeled in. Who gets saved first? There's only one doctor available, right? So, so the mamzer Talmid Chacham comes before the Kohen Gadol Amaretz, which seems to set our priorities here, right? And that seems to negate this Gemara in Gittin. Okay, the Rambam was like a real kanai. He was really in the beginning, at least, of his life, it seems to be based on the orders of his writings. It seems to be that he was very, very I don't know what the word is, stark, very
fanatical.
Not fanatical.
Fanatical.
No, I wouldn't call it fanatical.
Extreme. Not
extreme. I'd say he was very careful. He held the position that a Talmid Chacham comes before a Cohen, no matter what. Right, that's the mitzvah. He goes on and on. He even explains. I'm not going to read it inside. If you want to see it inside, you can see it in the introductory shiur. But he held that the halacha of giving a Cohen first only applies where the Cohen and Talmid Chacham are equal. But if the Talmid Chacham is a greater Talmid Chacham than the Cohen, how could you give a Cohen first? Right? He says it's arrogance. He says that's a whole. He explains a whole Gemara about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash just because the Talmidei Chachamim were embarrassed to take the first aliyah, right, in front of a Cohen, right? So I mean, it's like that's pretty amazing. If you talk about the Gemara says that the reason why the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed is because they didn't make Berachos HaTorah first, right? So everybody understands that before they learned, they didn't make a Berachos HaTorah. Right, the people didn't make a Berachos HaTorah. They just learned Torah. They didn't say Berachos HaTorah. And there's a whole drushos about them. They didn't appreciate the Torah really, and they didn't appreciate that it was from Hashem. They saw it as an academic study, so they never felt they had to make a bracha. There's all these different things. The Rambam says no, that's not what it means. It means that the Talmidei Chachamim, when it came time to who gets the first aliyah in Shul, and the Gabbai is looking around, so the Talmid Chacham should have raised his hand and says, "I'm the biggest scholar in the room. I get the first aliyah." But the Talmidei Chachamim were embarrassed to do that, so they didn't. And then what was the result of that? The result was that the covet of the Torah was put second, right? So, and then they would say, okay, there's no Talmid Chacham here. Any Talmidei Chachamim? No. Okay, so the Cohen, you Cohen, you're an ignoramus, you go first. And then the covet of the Torah is put second. So the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed because of this. This is like, it's you would never, I've never heard anyone explain this. This is how the Rabba explains it. Okay. But then, right, and okay, and then also like in the Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam had written that fil yimnu also lo nishmohem, right? That if a Cohen says, I'm not, it's okay, I'm going to be mevater my kavod, we don't listen to him, right? So, and now he's writing that the Cohen can be mochel. Not only that, but the Cohen has to be mochel in certain cases. So it seems like the Rambam is completely contradicting himself. And then the greatest contradiction, it seems, I mean, this is incredible. This is really, like, to me, this was I was shocked when I saw this. Now look at the halacha. So if I was going to now tell you, after going on and on about how the Rambam is so makbid and he's so careful that a Torah scholar goes first. So if I would say, okay, how did the Rambam codify this in the Mishnah Torah? How did he list this halacha in the Mishnah Torah? How would he have written this, right? So the Rambam wrote, right? You would say for sure that the Rambam says that a Cohen gets the first aliyah only in a situation, right, where the Cohen gets only in a situation, where the Cohen is a greater scholar than anyone else in the room, right? That's what you'd expect him to say, right? But look what he says here in source number 14. He said, right, you can see source number 14, right? That's what you're looking at also? I assume so. Okay. So the Rambam says, B'chol kriya v'kriya me'elu Cohen korei rishon, v'acharav Levi v'acharav Yisrael. He says Cohen always goes first, Levi second, Yisrael third. Okay, like as we see. U'minok pashut hu hayom she'afilu Cohen am haaretz kodem l'kos lefnei chacham gadol b'Yisrael. He says the minhag pashut. Now, minhag pashut means a lot of people, if you use modern Hebrew to explain the words minhag pashut, you get this wrong. Minhag pashut seems to be, pashut means simple in modern Hebrew, but it also has a different connotation. This is how the Rambam always uses it. Pashut also means spread out, like the common practice. Okay, so the Rambam says the common practice today, right, is that a Cohen Gadol, a Cohen Am Haaretz comes before Talmid Chacham. Right, so you sit there and you're like, "Whoa, hold on a second! You just went on it. Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and look at the rest of your writings. How could you write such a thing?" Right now, the Rambam does this every once in a while. He writes. I'll give you an example. There in like brachos hashachar, the brachos that we say when we early in the morning, right? There's like lists of like 18 brachos that we say. Ma'avir sheina me'afapai, right? Bokeh chivrim, zokef kafufim. So a lot of people say that when they get to shul in the morning. Right, the Gemara says that those brachos should be said when you do the action. So when you open up your eyes, you should say Pokeh Chivrim. When you get dressed, you should say Malbish Arumim. Right, you put on your belt, you say Ozer Yisrael B'Gvura, and that's how the halacha is built, and that's the way it should be. Right, now the Rambam says, but you see, there's a lot of people that say it should be the opposite. It should be everybody should say it in shul, just recite it in shul. And that should be, and so the Rambam quotes, that's the minhag pashut, the Rambam says, and then he says, and it's wrong. He says, don't do that, right? By the way, like there's a great Rishonim that say to do it that way, and that's why the common practice is. So here, though, the Rambam says the same formulation. He says this has become the minhag pashut, but he doesn't say it's wrong. He seems to accept it, right? So how does the Rambam accept it? This is the halacha now, right? It should not be this way, right? That's he said, okay. Great. Okay, so those are our questions. Okay.
Does the Rambam talk anywhere about Darkei Shalom?
I don't know. Not here. Not in this thing. Not in the Mishnah Torah. In this.
Right. When he's quoting these halachos, he doesn't say anything about we're doing this for Darkei Shalom.
I mean, he has it in Hilchos Chanukah, but nothing to do with what we're talking about. That's asking. In Hilchos Chanukah, he has like for Shabbos candles. If you only have Shabbos candles or if you have Shabbos candles or Chanukah candles, you can only afford one, right? So if you can only afford one and not the other, so what should you do? He says Shabbos candles comes first because Shabbos candles is for Shalom, right? So there's light in the house and people don't fight. So that's what he says. That's only off the top of my head. I mean, there has to be other examples.
No, but I'm saying, is it unusual for the Rambam when he's quoting this halacha not to quote the Gemara, the Mishna that says Mifnei Darkei Shalom?
Yeah, he doesn't. I wouldn't say that. Like based on his writings, you'd expect to see that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm saying like, I wouldn't be shocked either way. You know, the fact that he left it out doesn't hint anything to me. Okay.
Rabbi, just curious, if Darkei Shalom is D'Rabbanan, functionally, is it allowed to override a deoraisa?
It would be very strange. It would be very, very strange. It could happen in what's called a shave velotase, right? Where you don't actually do anything, you just allow things to happen. So for instance, the rabbis came along and said that you can't carry a shofar in Rosh Hashanah, right? That's a halacha. So therefore, if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, we don't blow shofar on that Shabbos. What happened this year, right? So you say, wait a minute, blowing shofar is deoraisa. How do the rabbis come along? Because in a case of sheva al taseh, you could do that. In this case, that's very difficult, right? Because how do you say sheva al taseh here, right? In other words, what's happening? It's not sheva al taseh. It's you have an aliyah. You have to give the aliyah to somebody. You're not just sitting by, right, and allowing the Cohen to stand up. Like you're saying, who are we going to give the aliyah to? So that'd be very hard to understand, right? How that would work. I'm not sure how that would work. Okay. Okay. So let's try to answer some of our questions here. Okay. So keep in mind, right? What do we say? What's the svara? The svara we said is that that we show the uniqueness of the Cohen, right? The whole mitzvah, להגדיל כהנים, to make Kohanim to elevate Kohanim, right? The mitzvah is to reflect the uniqueness of the Cohen, right? A Cohen has a unique role, right? And we saw there's a four-way machlokes, whether that role was as somebody that works in the base of mikdash, he gives the korbanos, whether he's set aside himself as a unique person, right? Or because he's it says I'm signed out. Am I still here?
Yep.
Still there.
Oh, strange. Okay, if I disappear, then we'll know why. But it says that I signed in somewhere else. I don't know why. Okay, and then it says that right, or it's the fact that he's a teacher, so that's why you have to honor the Cohen, right? So we saw different explanations as to what it could be. Okay, so that's the uniqueness that we're reflecting when we raise a Cohen, when we elevate a Cohen. Okay. So our first question was the Gemara. The Gemara pits the halacha of putting a Cohen first as either deoraisa or out of Dרכי Shalom. So if it's not deoraisa, so what's Dרכי Shalom, right? That was our first question. So I think that the superficial understanding, I think it's a misunderstanding, is that it's a takana, right? The rabbis have three different types of enactments they can make, right? That we call mitzvah darabanan. They have a gzira, which is something that they prohibit. They have a takana, which is something they institute, and then they have what's called they have a minhag, which is something that the people started that they then went ahead and retroactively approved of. So for instance, a gzira is you can't carry a pen on Shabbos, right? That's not from the Torah. There's no problem carrying a pen on Shabbos, right? The problem writing two letters. The rabbis came along and said, no, you can't carry a pen because then you might come to write. Then you have a takana, is something that we institute. So, for instance, Kiddush Shabbos morning. There's no obligation of having Kiddush Shabbos morning. The rabbis wanted to make the Shabbos meal somewhat special, so they instituted a takana that we make Kiddush on Shabbos morning. And then you have a minhag, which is something the people started. And then the rabbis saw that, oh, what a great idea, right? And like some sort of community that did it. So we're going to institute this as an obligation for everybody. But under the concept of a minhag, not a takana, that would be like halal on Rosh Chodesh. Okay? That's how we have this concept of a half halal, because it's a halal. There was one community out in Israel somewhere that did it. The rabbi said, that's a great idea. Let's institute that. Okay. So you might think that this is a takana to protect Shalom. Okay. But I don't think it's singularly to protect Shalom. I think that is obviously one of the goals of it. But I think it's also done to protect the kedusha of the Cohen by placing the Cohen first in all cases. I think that's the idea of Dרכי Shalom, right? This Mishna's thing about Dרכי Shalom. Okay. We questioned whether or not, whether Abaya seems to be negating the entire halacha, right? By saying that, well, the entire Torah is for Shalom. So what's the idea? We said Abaya can't argue with the Mishnah. So I think that Abaya is saying that this concept of Dרכי Shalom, of putting the Cohen first, only applies to specific cases where peace is threatened. In other words, if peace isn't threatened, you have a Talmid Chacham that everyone recognizes as a Talmid Chacham, right? So then in that case, you have where everybody recognizes as Talmid Chacham. So then your Dרכי Shalom's not threatened at all, right? So you don't have to worry. The only time you have to worry about Dרכי Shalom is where there's cases that peace is threatened, and therefore Abaya understands the mitzvah of kiddushto. Like Rav Amram will say later on, we learned this last week. We saw this and we'll see it, right? That he says that it's given to the Cohen no matter what, right? Even the Cohen Amar, it's because, right? So Abaya is saying that's what the kiddushto is coming to do, because in those cases, that's where Shalom, right? When it comes to an aliyah, that's where Shalom is threatened. Okay. Okay. Mar disagrees with Abaya when it comes to a shul, right? So how does right? So how does he do it? So Mar understands Abaya is saying it applies only in many situations where peace is threatened, right? So where is peace threatened in the right? So that's really only in a shul, right? At the Shabbos table, you have a Cohen sitting there, and you have a Talmid Chacham sitting there, right? Or you have people that think that the Talmid Chacham is a bigger Talmid Chacham than the Cohen, right? So you're not gonna have fights at your Shabbos table. That's not where Shalom is going to be interrupted. Right, Shalom is going to be interrupted with a massive fight in Shul where everybody's screaming, "No, that guy should get first. No, he should get first." Right, so that's how Rabba understands it, and he says that it's that the mitzvah of kiddushto, right, is very limited in nature. Right, it's right, it only applies to meals. Right, meals like very very specific limited situations, but like in a shul in a communal setting, so the kiddushto doesn't really apply there. Okay, so okay. So here's the big machlokes. Is Darchei Shalom deoraisa derabanan, right? So Rishon ben Yochai held that it was deoraisa, and Rishon ben Levi held it was derabanan. So how do we break down a deoraisa derabanan machlokes? Right, we talked about this earlier today, right? So how do you look at something like this and well, what exactly on a conceptual level, right? Well, if you'd ask somebody, okay, he holds the deoraisa, he holds the derabanan, what's happening? So they would say, oh, you know what's happening? Here's what's happening. They're arguing whether or not God said it or not. Okay, that's a little crazy. That's not like so conceptual. It's not so analytical. So rather, I think what the idea is that Rishon ben Yochai held that this halacha was from the Torah because the roles of it comes from the roles of the Kohanim, right? Their roles are as teachers of the Torah, right? So we're giving honor to the Torah, really, in Rishon ben Yochai's estimation. He says that's how he understands kiddushto. Kiddushto is giving honor to the Torah by giving honor to the teachers of the Torah, right? Kohanim aren't just Kohanim, right? They don't exist in their own realm, but rather Kohanim are being honored, as we saw in the Gemara, right? One opinion held, right? And I'd say that Rishon ben Yochai is consistent with this opinion that because they're the teachers of the Torah, so you're actually honoring the Torah, so that fits in. That's consistent with the deoraisa, okay? So, but Rav Yeshua ben Levi doesn't maintain that, right? He maintains that the entire it has nothing to do with something that already existed in the Torah, right? It wasn't right. This wasn't a way of showing it's a deoraisa. Rather, this is something that came along later on, right? The rabbis came along later on and wanted to elevate the Kohanim for not the roles of the Torah that they played, but because they have a unique status, and therefore the rabbis came along and said we have to recognize that unique status. But that was a derabanan enactment. That's not a deoraisa. That's not from the Torah. It's not consistent with anything in Torah. And there's no yesh me'ayin that they came along and said because of Darchei Shalom, we're gonna enact this idea. Okay, that's the idea. Okay, so Tosfos, right? So what does Tosfos say? So Tosfos holds asmachta. So Tosfos is aligned with Yeshua ben Levi's understanding that this is more a takana. It's not one of the 613 mitzvos, right? And he holds that, but you do see a hint to it in the in this enactment, right? We with when it comes to the kiddushto, you see the Torah does have an idea of kiddushto. Okay, okay. It seems from the Gemara, right, that from the Gemara's conclusion that Darchei Shalom comes to prevent a Cohen from honoring another Talmid Chacham. And as the situation that the Gemara lays out for us, right? We saw this. This is how we opened up the Shiur with this Gemara. Is that the Cohen sitting in Shul, and sitting next to him is his friend, the Talmid Chacham, right? And the Cohen's going to say, no, you should really give him the first aliyah. He's a Talmid Chacham, and then everyone's going to sit there in Shul and scream, no, he's only giving him the aliyah because it's his friend. That guy sitting 3 rows up, he's a bigger Talmid Chacham than the guy sitting next to him. And then the whole Shul breaks out into a fight, right? Another group says Talmid Chacham and everything else, right? So okay, but now what happens is then the Gemara says, okay, what should we do? We only give it to the Cohen. Right, we give the aliyah to the Cohen, and that way there's no more fights. Okay, but what happens to the mitzvah of honoring a Talmid Chacham? Right, where did that mitzvah go? right? So that gets put aside, right? So if you want to go ahead, I don't know how you would explain this, but if you want to go ahead, and I think that this is, if you just read the Gemara on a Bekias level, if you're just reading it like overall, so I think this is what you would say. But I think that you would say that, okay, well, the Gemara, yeah, they make there's a compromise here in order to keep the peace. We set aside one mitzvah and we give to the Cohen in order to keep the peace. But I don't think that's what's happening. Rather, I want to go back to what I said before when we were explaining our Shiur by Yachai, that Rav Masna, if you remember in the Gemara, had said that this mitzvah is really a mitzvah of honoring the teachers of the Torah. In which case, וקדושתו, right, could be understood as really honoring the covenant of the Torah. It's really honoring the Torah. So in that case, right, when there's no contradiction between setting aside giving the first aliyah to a Talmid Chacham and honoring the Cohen, because the honoring the Cohen is honoring the Torah, because you're honoring the fact that the Cohen, the uniqueness of the Kohanim, are the fact that they're teachers of the Torah. So I think in that case, there's no real compromise. Okay. Okay. Then the Gemara says that a Torah scholar takes first like a Cohen. This is the Gemara in Nedarim that we saw, right? That a Talmid Chacham should take first like a Cohen. So how do we understand this Gemara? So the Gemara says the Gemara says, look, you look at a Talmid Chacham, look at a Cohen, they're the exact same things. They're teachers of the Torah. So if they're teachers of the Torah, right, they're teaching the Torah anyway, so then they're both the same exact thing, right? There's no problem. So that's what the Gemara says. We honor Talmid Chacham, honor Cohen. Doesn't say which one comes first. We both we honor them both first. Right, so how do you understand? That's okay, because the Cohen, there's two types of ways of honoring the covenant Torah, right, or honoring the Torah itself. One is through the Talmidei Chachamim, the scholars, and the other one is the teachers. So even if the Cohen isn't himself a scholar, but he still is this idea of a Torah teacher, and since he's a Torah teacher, we honor him. Okay, okay. So we said that the Gemara seems to say that zilzul b'chvod Torah, that it is a degradation to the covenant Torah if the Cohen and the Chacham aren't equal, right? And the Ritva seems to be adding that even if the Chacham and Cohen aren't equal, if the Chacham is mochel, it's not zilzul covenant Torah. Now, if the Talmid Chacham sits there and says, "No, I know I have the right to the first aliyah, let's give to the Cohen." So that seems to be exactly our case. It's zilzul covenant Torah. But the Ritva came along and said, "No, that's not zilzul covenant Torah." So why not? So I think that by the fact, and this is what the Ritva is saying, the fact that you're mentioning and saying that we're going to first turn to the Talmid Chacham and ask him to take the aliyah, that's already giving cover to the Torah. If the Talmid Chacham then says, "I don't need the aliyah, you can give it to this guy," so then that's not zilzul b'chavad Torah, because you've recognized the primacy of the Talmid Chacham. So you don't really have that problem. Okay. Now he said, why doesn't the mitzvah of וקדושתו apply when it comes to an ignorant Cohen in the presence of a Talmid Chacham, right? So that we want to know, right? Why, right? So then, right? So how is it zilzul b'chavad Torah if you're pushing off the mitzvah of וקדושתו, right? So how do we understand that balance? So if you understand וקדושתו as honoring the Torah, okay, then it wouldn't apply when it comes to an ignorant Cohen in the presence of a Talmid Chacham, right? וקדושתו is a method of honoring the Torah, right? Because you're honoring this teacher of the Torah. So zilzul b'chvod Torah pushes off the mitzvah. וקדושתו is not an issue. It does either way you go. You're honoring the Torah. It's not a problem. Okay. What about those that give the cover to the Cohen even above a Talmid Chacham, that they hold l'chachila, no questions asked, no mechila, no nothing, right? You always give, right? There's an opinion that you always give the cover to the Cohen first above the Talmid Chacham, right? So because there's duplicity, I guess, of qualities to the Cohen, right? The fact that he's in the Beis HaMikdash and he's a teacher, right? So they would hold that idea that puts a Cohen above a Talmid Chacham, the obligation to honor him, right? Now the Chinuch comes along and says something very interesting, right? This is source number 15 here, right? The Chinuch says, "Achshav b'zman hazeh lo re'u mi shehektim atzmo l'shum Cohen mipnei chachmaso," right? So he says, you see this nowadays. You never find, no one's ever seen this. I mean, I would be shocked if anybody could ever report seeing this, where they call the first aliyah and they say Yamod, and they say about to call Cohen, and Talmid Chacham gets up and objects, right? And he says, "No, I deserve the first aliyah. Tell the Cohen to sit down. We'd be shocked, right? Absolutely shocked. I remember one time in Shul, I don't like telling stories in this year, but I have to say, I remember one time in Shul, they called the Cohen up in Mitzvah Yericho. This is like, I think, my first year living there. And there was a guest that was there for Shabbos, and he was a Cohen, and he also happened to be a rabbi. So they called him up to give him the first aliyah, and they left out Rav as his, as like before they said his first name. And the guy corrected the gabbai. I was shocked. I had never seen that in my life. Like somebody that, Doug, who are you to call me by my first name? Call me, like, he was a young guy. I was beyond belief. So can you imagine this, where a Talmid Chacham would object and say, I deserve the first aliyah? You would be beyond yourself. So he says, right? He says, because another simple humility tells you don't do something like that, right? Which is why we don't do it. And the Mishnah Berurah comes along. He gives a different answer. He says, because now that there's an established minhag, and I think this can explain the Rambam, right? Now that there's an established minhag to do something that one way, right? That we just say, okay, the Cohen always comes first. That's the established minhag, whether or not it was correct to institute it or not. So then, right? So usually, if you'd say you have an incorrect minhag, right? Like the example that we gave of saying brachos when you get to Shul. So there, the Rambam's going to tell you can't do that, right? Because then you're saying Hashem's name in vain. Right, you can't make a shahakal 25 minutes after you drink the water and you've thrown out your cup and you're gone. So you can't. I mean, it's not exactly the same thing, but you can't say a bracha on lightning an hour after you see the lightning. So you can't make a bracha on getting dressed an hour after you're dressed and you're in shul. That you can't do that. So the Rambam's going to say by keeping the simple minhag of making brachos in shul, you're violating saying God's name in vain. So you can't do that. But here, what's the fear? The fear is that by giving the Cohen first, we're being mezalzel the kavod Torah. So the Chavetz Chaim comes along. It's a very nice answer that he gives that I think explains the Rambam here. That the Rambam is saying it's only zilzul b'kavod Torah when everybody's aware of the fact that the Talmid Chacham should get first. But if you're not aware that the Talmid Chacham should go first, right? This is just the minhag pashut. So nobody's setting aside the kavod Torah. Nobody's sitting there and saying to themselves, well, really, we should give the kavod to the Talmid Chacham first, but we gave it to Cohen, right? So no one knows. This has just become the established minhag. There's no idea of shaming the Torah now, right? So there's no reason why you have to go along and correct the minhag anymore, because it's not, the minhag isn't violating zilzul b'chol Torah. It's only you only violate zilzul b'chol Torah when you know what the different issues are. That's the only time that there's an issue. But otherwise, there's no zilzul b'chol Torah. Okay. Then we say, okay. Then the Rambam comes along and we said, okay. All right, so that explains the Rambam. Okay, and then, but in the Sefer Mitzvos, so that's one last thing we have in the Rambam. In the Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam came along, right? The Rambam says that filu yimnu also lo nishmam. Even if the Cohen says, I'm not gonna I don't care about this, right? So we said we don't listen to him. And now he's saying, right, that you don't listen to it. Right? You say the Cohen can be mochel for the Talmid Chacham, right? So in the Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam says that we don't listen to the Cohen and we give him kavod whether or not he wants it or not, right? So even if he isn't makbid, right? So in the Perush Mishnah, when he wrote that the Cohen can be mochel, the Rambam's not contradicting himself. In the Sefer Mitzvos, he's talking about non-Kohanim acting towards a Cohen, right? So he's saying then a non-Cohen acting, like relating to a Cohen, doesn't listen to the Cohen when he says, I don't care. But in the Perush Mishnah, he's referring to the Cohen himself. The Cohen shouldn't step forward for that first aliyah, right? So the Cohen himself should say, now it becomes somewhat dysfunctional in the running of a shul. But what should happen is, right, according to what the Rambam is saying, is that the Cohen himself has no right to say, I'm not going to take the aliyah, right? Because it's not about you, it's about the tzibur recognizing you, right? So he can't put it aside, okay? But the Cohen himself, right? So in the Perush Mishnayos, when he says that Talmid Chacham should come first, right? So there, it's not talking about the Cohen's decision, right? In this case, then you have to put then in that case you have to put the Talmid Chacham first. We have to put the Talmid Chacham first in that case, right? So when it's about the Cohen's not allowed to say, I'm not careful about this. It's not in your hands. It's not about you. But what the Rambam's coming and saying is that when we have a choice between the two, we have to put the Talmid Chacham first. Okay. Last thing is just this interesting Beis Yosef that I wanted to show you. Doesn't really relate so much to this year, but something that you see as common practice. I thought maybe it would come up, or 6 weeks from now you'll be in Shul and you'll see this happen. Wonder if there's a source for this, but they used to sell the lios, right? So on Simchas Torah, most shuls do this. Sfardim sell the lios every Shabbos, right? So the first aliyah on Simchas Torah, Chas and Breishis, is a very important aliyah, right? Meaning that it's not so important like to get the aliyah, but it's an important aliyah, and then it usually sells for a lot of money. So, but it should really go to the Cohen, right? That's the idea. This aliyah should go to the Cohen. So they used to ask the Kohanim to step out of Shul, right? They used to say, "Can you step out of Shul so we can sell this aliyah to somebody else?" So it brings down this case that the Mari Cologne. So they had 1 year, the Cohen wouldn't leave, right? He wouldn't leave. He said, "No, I want the first aliyah. I'm not gonna pay for it, but I want the first aliyah." And then let's go. So then they, in order to make sure it didn't happen, they called the police, right? The non-Jewish police. They called the police to make sure the Cohen didn't come to Shul that day, right? So they said, "If you're gonna come to Shul, we're gonna arrest you." So and that's what they did. They had him arrested. So they say he's trespassing on a Shul property. He has no right to be here. And that they went on to Kedekach. So you see nowadays a lot of times it's usually not done to honor a Tam Chacham. It's usually like there's a lot of like family if they're for a bar mitzvah and they want to have more aliyos, so they usually send the Kohanim out. So I used to think this was like above my, so you can never do such a thing. But it seems to be there's a strong makor for this in the Beis Yosef here. Okay, that's our shiur for today.
We have a Cohen that simply walks out so that you can't call him.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that seems to be that's the same thing. Yeah. But you don't have to call.
I have a general question now.
Yeah.
So we've gone through the Psukim, the Mishna, the Gemara, and the Rambam and Beis Yosef, whatever, and other Rishonim, talking about pitting the Kohen against the Talmid Chacham when it comes to the famous example of giving an aliyah. Where is there somewhere in Halacha that also brings us the Navi and the Melech Yisrael? If they were in the room, what would happen?
I've never seen it. I don't know. It's a good question.
Why do we not see that because it's something that we don't practice today? Because there's no such thing?
No, I don't know. The Gemara could bring it up. I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I don't know how you'd figure that out.
I mean, it would sound logical that if the king walked into the room,
yeah, you get the first.
Torah,
well, there is a mitzvah of honoring the king. That's a mitzvah deoraisa. So I assume it would. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. I don't know.
But you haven't come across that sort of deal.
No. There are the calls of honoring the king, the Rambam has, but it's not generally like with things like of this nature. Okay.
So,
But next week, hopefully, I'll be back in Eretz Yisrael.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.